Sarah Mitchell was a 28-year-old nurse who lived alone in a small apartment complex in Millbrook, Connecticut. On that October night, she was finishing her shift notes when the power suddenly died. The familiar hum of her refrigerator stopped. Her laptop screen went black. Complete silence filled the room. She grabbed her phone's flashlight and walked to the window. The entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness. Streetlights were out. Every house sat in complete blackness. Every house except one. At the end of her street, the old Victorian house glowed with a pale greenish light. Not electric light, something else entirely. Sarah had lived on this street for 3 years and knew that house had been abandoned since before she moved in. The windows were boarded up and the yard was overgrown with weeds. But now, someone was standing in the front yard. The figure was tall and perfectly still. Even from her third-floor window, Sarah could see it clearly against the strange light emanating from the house. The person wasn't moving, just standing there, facing her building. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call 911. No signal. The cell towers were down too. She looked back outside. The figure was still there, but now it seemed closer to the street. Had it moved? She blinked hard and looked again. The figure was definitely closer. It was walking toward her building with slow, deliberate steps. Sarah backed away from the window, her heart pounding. When she found the courage to look again, the figure was crossing the street. The strange light from the house was getting brighter. It cast long shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Sarah could now see that the figure was wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, a long coat that reached the ground, and his face was completely white. Sarah ran to her door and checked the locks. She pushed her couch against the entrance. The figure was now in the parking lot of her building. She could hear footsteps on the gravel below, slow, methodical steps that seemed to echo despite the soft surface. The footsteps stopped directly below her window.
Sarah held her breath and counted to 60. Then she heard something that made her stomach drop, the sound of her building's main door opening. The heavy metal door that required a key card to enter. Someone was inside the building. The footsteps began again, this time on the stairs leading to her floor. Each step was slow and deliberate. Sarah grabbed a kitchen knife and pressed her back against the wall. The footsteps reached her floor and stopped right outside her door. For 10 minutes, Sarah stood frozen in her apartment. No sound came from the hallway, no movement, just the knowledge that something was standing right outside her door in the darkness.
When Sarah finally worked up the courage to look outside, the street was normal again. The Victorian house sat dark and abandoned, just as it had been for years. But in the soft earth of her building's parking lot, she could clearly see footprints, large footprints that led from the street to her building and back again. The next morning, Sarah learned that she wasn't the only one who had experienced something strange that night. 7 other residents on her street reported seeing the same figure during the blackout. All described the same tall person in the long coat. All saw the same unnatural light coming from the abandoned house. But when police investigated the Victorian house, they found it had been sealed shut for over a decade. The doors were nailed closed from the inside. The windows were boarded up with planks that hadn't been disturbed in years. There was no way anyone could have been inside that house.
Marcus Thompson was working late at his office building in downtown Chicago when the citywide blackout hit. It was February 8th, 2021, and a winter storm had knocked out power to nearly half the city. Marcus was a security guard for a 40-story office building, and he was making his final rounds when everything went dark. The building's emergency lighting kicked in, casting an eerie red glow through the hallways. Marcus's radio crackled with reports from other buildings. The blackout was massive. It could be hours before power was restored. Marcus was on the 32nd floor when he heard it, the sound of an elevator moving. But that was impossible. The elevators automatically shut down during power outages. The emergency power only covered basic lighting and fire safety systems. He followed the sound down the hall. The elevator indicator showed that car number 3 was moving.
It was currently on the 28th floor and going up. Marcus watched the numbers climb. 29, 30, 31, 32. The elevator stopped on his floor. The doors opened. Inside the elevator was a woman in a business suit. She looked normal except for one thing. She was completely soaked. Water dripped from her hair and clothes onto the elevator floor. She stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Marcus asked. The woman didn't respond. She didn't even blink. Marcus stepped closer. The woman's skin was pale blue, and her lips were purple. She looked like she had been underwater for a long time, but she was standing upright, breathing normally. "Ma'am, I need you to exit the elevator," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman slowly turned her head toward him. Her eyes were completely white. The elevator doors began to close. Marcus jumped back as the car started moving again. He watched the floor indicator. 33, 34, 35. The elevator was going to the top floors where there should be no one. Marcus radioed for backup, but his radio was dead. He tried his cell phone. No signal. He was alone in the building with whatever was in that elevator. He decided to take the stairs down to the lobby. As he reached the stairwell, he heard the elevator moving again. This time it was going down. Fast. Much faster than elevators normally moved. Marcus ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time. He could hear the elevator speeding past each floor. When he reached the lobby, he saw the elevator indicator showing that car number 3 was on the basement level. The building had 3 basement levels, but only the first 2 were accessible to the elevator. The indicator showed the elevator was on B3, but B3 didn't exist. Marcus waited in the lobby, watching the elevator numbers. For 20 minutes, the elevator stayed on B3. Then it began moving up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was moving normally now, stopping at each floor for exactly 30 seconds before continuing. When the elevator reached the 15th floor, it stopped. The doors opened, and Marcus could see it was empty. No woman, no water on the floor, just an empty elevator car. But something was wrong. The elevator's emergency lighting was flickering in a pattern, on and off, like a signal. Marcus realized the pattern was Morse code. He had learned it in the military years ago. The lights were spelling out a message, "Help me." The elevator continued this pattern for 5 more minutes, then the power came back on. The building's normal lighting returned. The elevator stopped its Morse code message and returned to normal operation. Marcus immediately called the police. When they arrived, they searched the entire building. No woman, no signs of water anywhere. But when they checked the building's construction records, they made a disturbing discovery. During the building's construction in 1987, a worker had died in an accident involving elevator car number 3. The worker was a woman named Patricia Collins. She had drowned when a water main burst in the basement during construction. Her body was never recovered. The basement level where she died was sealed off and became part of the building's foundation. On the original blueprints, it was labeled B3. The Hendricks family lived on a remote farm in rural Kansas. Tom and Linda Hendricks had moved there with their 2 children, Emma and Jake, to escape city life. Their nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. On the night of March 22, 2020, a severe thunderstorm knocked out power to their entire county. The family was prepared for outages. They had flashlights, candles, and a generator. But around midnight, something happened that no amount of preparation could have helped them with. Emma, who was 16, was in her bedroom reading by flashlight when she heard scratching at her window. She assumed it was tree branches in the wind, but when she looked outside, she saw hands pressed against the glass. Human hands. Someone was standing outside her second-story window. Emma screamed and ran to her parents' room. Tom grabbed his shotgun and flashlight. When they returned to Emma's room, no one was at the window, but there were muddy handprints on the glass. Tom went outside to investigate. In the soft mud below Emma's window, he found footprints. But these weren't normal footprints. They were much larger than any human foot should be, and they seemed to have too many toes. As Tom followed the tracks with his flashlight, he realized they didn't lead away from the house. They led around it. Something had been walking in circles around their home. The family gathered in the living room. Tom kept his gun ready while Linda comforted the children. For an hour they sat in silence, listening to the storm outside. Then they heard it, a sound like someone walking on the roof. Slow, heavy footsteps moving from one end of the house to the other. The footsteps stopped directly above the living room. Something began scratching at the ceiling, long, deliberate scratches like claws on wood. The scratching formed a pattern, 3 long scratches, then 3 short ones, then 3 long ones again. Jake, who was 12, recognized the pattern. "That's SOS," he whispered. "Someone's asking for help." But Tom knew better. Nothing human could be on their roof in this storm, and those footprints outside weren't human either. The scratching continued for 20 minutes. Then it stopped. The family heard the footsteps moving across the roof again, this time toward the back of the house. Tom decided to check the back door. As he approached the kitchen, he saw something that made him freeze. The back door was open. Not just unlocked, completely open. Cold rain was blowing into the house. Tom was certain he had locked that door. He locked it every night without fail. But now it stood wide open, and there were wet footprints leading from the door into the kitchen. The footprints were the same as the ones outside Emma's window, large with too many toes. But these were inside their house. Tom followed the tracks. They led through the kitchen, into the dining room, and stopped at the bottom of the stairs.
Whatever had made them had gone upstairs. "Everyone stay here," Tom whispered to his family. He climbed the stairs slowly, his gun ready. The footprints led down the hallway to Emma's room. Inside Emma's room, Tom found something that made no sense. The window was open. Not just unlocked, completely open with the screen removed. Rain was pouring into the room, soaking the carpet and furniture, but Emma's room was on the 2nd floor. Nothing could have opened that window from the outside unless it could fly, and the screen was lying on the floor inside the room, not outside where it should have fallen. Tom closed the window and returned to his family. They spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, listening to sounds from upstairs. Doors opening and closing, footsteps in the hallway, the sound of furniture being moved. When dawn broke and the storm passed, the family went upstairs to assess the damage. Every room had been disturbed. Furniture was rearranged. Windows were open. Clothes were scattered on the floor. But the most disturbing discovery was in Emma's room. Scratched into the wooden floor were the same symbols they had heard on the roof. 3 long scratches, 3 short ones, 3 long ones, SOS. But below that message, scratched much deeper into the wood, were other symbols. Tom couldn't read them, but they looked like letters from another language, ancient letters. The Hendricks family left the farm that same day. They never returned, but other families who later lived in the house reported similar experiences during power outages. The sounds on the roof, the open doors and windows, the footprints that weren't quite human. Local historians eventually discovered that the farm had been built on land where a Native American burial ground once stood. The symbols scratched into Emma's floor were identified as ancient tribal markings. They translated to a single word: trapped. David Chin was a maintenance worker for the New York City subway system. On August 14, 2019, a massive power grid failure shut down most of Manhattan. David was working the night shift, inspecting tracks in the abandoned City Hall station when the lights went out. The City Hall station had been closed to the public since 1945, but it was still used by maintenance crews. David knew the tunnels well. He had worked them for 15 years. But when the emergency lighting failed, he found himself in complete darkness deep underground. David's flashlight had about 2 hours of battery life. He needed to make it to the nearest active station, which was a half-mile walk through the tunnels. He started moving carefully along the tracks, using his flashlight to guide the way. After walking for 10 minutes, David heard something that shouldn't have been possible: the sound of a train approaching. But all subway service had been suspended due to the blackout. No trains were running. The sound grew louder. David could feel the vibration of the tracks under his feet. He pressed himself against the tunnel wall as the sound passed by. But he saw nothing. No lights, no train cars. Just the sound and vibration of something heavy moving through the darkness. David continued walking. 5 minutes later, he heard it again. Another train passing in the opposite direction. Again, he saw nothing. Just the sound of metal wheels on tracks and the vibration that shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. As David walked deeper into the tunnel system, he began to notice something else. The walls were covered with graffiti, but not the usual subway graffiti. These were symbols and words in languages he didn't recognize, and they seemed to glow faintly in the darkness.
as if they were absorbing his flashlight beam and reflecting it back. David had walked these tunnels hundreds of times. He knew every inch of the walls. This graffiti had never been there before. He reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. David knew he needed to take the middle tunnel to reach the active station. But as he pointed his flashlight down the middle tunnel, he saw something that made him step back. The tunnel was full of people. They were standing on the tracks, facing away from him. Men and women in old-fashioned clothes. Some wore uniforms that looked like they were from the 1940s. Others were dressed in work clothes from even earlier eras. None of them were moving. They stood perfectly still, as if they were waiting for something. David called out to them. "Hello, are you all right? Do you need help?" One of the figures slowly turned around. It was a woman in a 1940s dress. Her face was pale and her eyes were hollow. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Then all the figures began to turn around. David found himself facing dozens of people, all with the same pale faces and hollow eyes. They started walking toward him.
David ran back the way he came. Behind him, he could hear the sound of footsteps. Not running footsteps, but the slow, steady walk of people who knew they had all the time in the world. David took a different tunnel, one that would lead him to a different station. But after walking for 20 minutes, he found himself back at the same junction. The same 3 tunnels stretched out before him. The same crowd of people stood in the middle tunnel. This was impossible. The tunnels didn't connect in a loop. David had walked in a straight line, but somehow he was back where he started. He tried the left tunnel this time. After 30 minutes of walking, he emerged at the same junction again. The crowd in the middle tunnel had grown larger. More people in old-fashioned clothes, more hollow eyes staring at him. David realized he was trapped. Every tunnel led back to the same place, and each time he returned, there were more people waiting for him. He tried one more time, taking the right tunnel. This time he found something different. The tunnel led to a platform he had never seen before. It looked like an old subway station, but it was much older than any station David knew about. The platform was lit by gas lamps that burned with a blue flame. On the platform stood a group of people in modern clothes. They looked normal, except for their eyes. Their eyes were the same hollow black as the people in the tunnels. A man in a business suit stepped forward. "Welcome to the City Hall station," he said. "We've been waiting for you." David backed away. "This isn't the City Hall station. I work in the City Hall station. It doesn't look like this." The man smiled. "This is the original City Hall station, the one that was sealed off in 1945, the one where the accident happened." "What accident?" "The train derailment. 47 people died in this station in 1945. The city covered it up, sealed the station, pretended it never happened." David looked around. The platform was full of people now, all with hollow eyes, all wearing clothes from different time periods. "We can't leave," the man continued. "We're trapped here, but now you can help us. You can take our place." David ran toward the tunnel entrance, but it was gone. The tunnel opening had been sealed with bricks. He was trapped on the platform with the crowd of hollow-eyed people. For hours, David searched for another way out, but the platform was completely enclosed. No tunnels, no stairs, no exit. Just as David was beginning to panic, he heard a sound, a real train approaching. He looked down the tracks and saw lights. A subway train was pulling into the station. The train stopped, and the doors opened. David ran toward it, but the hollow-eyed people blocked his path. "You can't leave," they said in unison. "Not until someone takes your place." David pushed through the crowd and jumped onto the train. The doors closed just as the hollow-eyed people reached for him. The train began to move. David looked back at the platform. The people were still there, staring at him through the windows. But now they were fading, becoming transparent. The train emerged from the tunnels into daylight. David found himself at Grand Central Station. The power was back on. The city was returning to normal. But David never worked in the subway tunnels again, and he never told anyone about the sealed station or the people trapped there, because he knew that somewhere deep beneath the city, they were still waiting, still trapped, still looking for someone to take their place.